This video will go through the process of creating an animated 3D object for the Kaneva game client. This process is composed of two parts. The first part is identical to the process that you would go through to create a 3D object. The second part is very similar to the steps that you need to take to create an emote. So you put these two together and you get an animated 3D object. So let's just take a look at Max here and see what we've got. You can see in the scene I've got two meshes here, support structure mesh that I want to remain static, and then this pendulum mesh which will actually animate a bit later. Now if you've done any animation in 3ds Max or a comparable 3D package, you may be tempted to actually animate this pendulum directly. So if I were to set auto key and then go ahead and set a rotation key in frame 1, advance the timeline to frame 20, for example, and swing it out 15 or so degrees, and then step to the timeline, you can see that we're getting some motion in 3ds Max. It's not exactly the motion that I want, but you can see that something's moving. If we were to try and export this to the Kaneva game client, we wouldn't get anything. The Kaneva game client is only going to work with bone-based animation. So whereas you see something moving in 3ds Max, this particular method of animation is not going to translate. So object transforms that you're keying or vertex transforms are not going to translate into the Kaneva game client. But as I said, bone animation will. So let's go ahead and delete those keys, and let's create a skeleton. So you could use max bones, but I'm just going to use geometric primitives for this demo. So we'll give it a size of 10 by 10 by 1 or so, and I'm going to turn off auto key. I don't want to key in any of these attributes accidentally. We've got our first bone. I'm going to call it bone underscore root, because it's going to be a root bone. I find it handy as an organizational principle to give the bones a prefix. It isn't strictly necessary. Let's go ahead and move the bone to the origin of our scene, and I'm going to hit Alt X to make it transparent. And we're going to need this bone. Actually will be the bone that we'll use for our structure. We'll need another bone for the pendulum, so let's go ahead and create that bone. And I'm going to make it 4 by 4 by 100. I happen to know that my structure is 100 units tall. And I'm going to go ahead and Alt X it as well to make it transparent. We'll call it bone pendulum. And I'm going to rotate it upside down because we need the pivot point to be the topmost point of the object. And let's go ahead and move it into place. Okay. Now, just for convenience, I'm actually going to make the pendulum bone the child of the root. And I think I'm going to shorten it up just a little bit. I don't actually want it to touch the ground here, so let's make it 90 units long. And let's use the link tool. And I'm just going to drag it down to our root. Now, if we move the root, now that they're linked, it should also move the pendulum bone with it. Okay, this is a child now of the root bone. Now in our case, there isn't a huge benefit to doing this, but you might have a very complex skeleton, and in that case it's very handy to be able to grab that root bone and move it around for a variety of reasons. So you can see now if we grab the pendulum bone and begin to rotate it, it's moving quite nicely. Of course, the problem is the visible geometry is not moving with the bone, so that's because we don't have any kind of skinning going on. So what we need to do that in 3ds Max is the skin modifier. So let's do the static structure first. So I'm just going to select it, and then I'm going to go to the modifier tab in the modifier list, and we're going to find skin. You could also use physique. Physique is skin's predecessor. I find skin to be more modern and just more intuitive, so I prefer skin, but you could use physique. Alright, so now that we've got our skin modifier applied, we need to add a bone. In the case of this particular modifier, that bone is going to be the root bone, so we'll click our bone underscore root bone. Okay, and luckily for us, for the sake of simplicity, each of these modifiers we're going to be applying, or these skin modifiers, is going to have a single bone and only one bone. And because of that, that bone is automatically going to influence every vertex in the mesh that it's assigned to 100%. So I can demonstrate that by grabbing a root bone and moving it around. You can see that the structure moves with it in a one-to-one fashion. For more organic applications, or when you need some squash and stretch, that sort of thing, you're probably going to have multiple bones for a single skin modifier, and that's going to mean more complex weighting. We're going to sidestep that. This is a mechanical kind of structure, so it probably is a much better example for a demo. Might go into a more complex video at some later point. So we've got our support structure taken care of. Now we need a skin modifier for a pendulum. So I actually have a button here to do that, so I'm just going to click skin here and add the modifiers before, and this time we're going to select the pendulum bone. Alright, so now you can see that as I move the root, the whole entire structure should move. And perhaps equally exciting is the fact now that we can move our pendulum with our pendulum bone. So let's turn auto key on, and let's go ahead and add some animation. I'm going to set rotation frame at our 0 frame, and let's move to frame 20, and we'll swing our pendulum forward 15. Seems like a good amount of rotation, and we'll move on to frame 60 and swing it backward 30 degrees. And for our last frame, let's go ahead and reset it to our vertical initial position. Okay, I'm going to turn off auto key, and let's just play it and see what we've got. Looks nice, very nice. I'm going to mess with the curves real quick in the curve editor. This is just something I'm doing because I want to tweak the actual look of it a bit. So I'm just going to go convert the curves to linear, and I'm going to grab the keyframes in the middle, and I'm going to set those to automatic. So really this is beyond the scope of the video. I'm just doing this just to improve the aesthetics a little bit. So alright, go ahead and close the curve editor. Let's take another look at our animation. Okay, I think that's a bit better. Okay, so at this point we're ready to actually do some exporting. The first file we export is going to contain mesh data, and the second file we export will actually include animation data in that. You can include both in the same file, but generally speaking it's safer to isolate the two. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and select everything that's visible in the scene. You can see here it's not terribly complex. We have our two bones, and then we have our two visible meshes, the pendulum mesh and the support structure. I'm going to go to File and Export Selected, and let's just call it pendulum. And you can see I've set my file type to Collada. We'll click Save. Notice I don't have animation checked. We'll do that in another pass. Okay, go ahead and click OK. Let's verify that that file was indeed created. Excellent, there's our file. Now while we're in 3ds Max, let's go ahead and export our animation. So to do that, it's very similar. We select all the objects. Let's go to File, Export Selected. And this time I'm going to call it Pendulum Anim, because we've got animation data we will have in this file. So click Save, and I'm going to click Enable Export under the animation heading. We want 0 to 80, and we'll go ahead and click OK. Okay, at this point we're ready to go into the Kaneva game client. And let's go ahead and pull up our Explorer window. So as I said before, the first part of this is going to echo the 3D object import process exactly. So let's just create a 3D object based on our pendulum. To do that, I'm going to grab the pendulum file that has the mesh data only. It's a 3D model. This object's quite large, so let's make it smaller, maybe 10%. And click next step. So there it is. Looks good. We'll click submit item. And let's rotate it a little bit just to make it maybe a bit more intuitive as to what it actually looks like. And we'll click submit. And let's call it pendulum. And I'm going to put in parentheses, say can be animated. And we'll use the same string for the description. Category, who knows? I'm going to set it to architecture water features because that's convenient. Let's make it public. Pass type general pass. Make it 0 for the design commission. And let's pay for it with rewards. And derivable's fine. Alright, so let's create that item. And let's go back to the client. And we can go ahead and discard this object. Alright, so now we should have a copy of the pendulum in our inventory. So let's browse to it and go ahead and place it. There it is. Okay, now we're ready to add the animation. This is kind of the fun part, I think. To do that, we'll go back to where we exported our Cloda files, and we'll pick the Cloda file that has animation data. Let's grab that and drag that onto our 3D object. And we'll tell it it's an animation. And you can see we've already got some motion. So if you wanted to, you could adjust these parameters, maybe speed it up, slow it down. I actually like what I'm seeing. It's basically what I was going for. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. And again, let's go ahead and rotate it. Maybe give it an angle that's a little bit more flattering to it. Click submit. And we'll fill out a form. I'm going to call this pendulum animation. And we'll just call it swing. Again, this is going to be public, general access. No design commission. Pay with rewards, and we're ready to go. I'm going to agree to the terms. Alright, so let's go back to the client. And let's pick this object up. And let's place it again. So there's our pendulum. We'll place it as before. Now you may wonder, I've got the pendulum, and I also have a copy of the animation that I just uploaded. How do I actually play it? Well, to do that, just right-click it. That'll bring up the right-click menu. From here, we just need to click the animation button. And you can see we've got an animation here, the swing animation. So let's click it. And we'll use the use button to lock it in. You may have noticed there are some other options in that menu. There's the More Animations tab. Now in this case, we've only uploaded a single animation, and so we don't have any choices. But say we were a consumer and we had purchased this item, and the creator had created 10 animations for it. All 10 of those animations would show up in this tab, and this is a convenient way to actually buy them if you're the consumer. Since we uploaded it, we already own the only animation available for it. So I think that's about it for this particular demo. As I said, we may go into, at some point in the future, we may try to cover a more complex example of an animated object. But hopefully this is helpful. I'm really excited about this. I think this is a very powerful feature that we've added, and so I'm very excited to see what you guys come up with.